Good morning and Happy New Year again. Uh, we all had our favorite places in India growing up. We used to hang out there with our friends. Like that, we had our own favorite place. It was one of our friends' carpenter shop. His name was Manoharan. That was where we all used to get together and spend our times. You, you can go there anytime because it's always open. And then all of us, we had our mobiles. If there was a problem with the seat or if there was a problem with something else, we used to go there because he used to always have all the tools. So that was our favorite place. And growing up with him, even now we have a good contact with him, he was a carpenter. And he was the go-to person. Whenever you had a marriage in your house, hey, Mano, can you come and fix all of these things? Or whatever was it, like a handyman, he was the go-to guy. And growing up with him, I realized he does predominantly 4 things as a carpenter. And today we'll meditate upon those 4 things of what a carpenter does. Let's bow our head in prayer. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable in your sight, Lord, our rock, our redeemer. So what does a carpenter do? The first thing that we saw and that we see, what a carpenter predominantly does is he creates. He creates things out of wood. And what is a wood? A wood was once a part of a living tree. It was living, but now it is dead. And this carpenter, he takes this wood, a dead thing, and does amazing work on it and brings it to life. And he creates some useful things out of these dead pieces of wood. We see one instance of that in Genesis chapter 18, which was our Old Testament reading. Abraham and Sarah, they were almost like they're dead in their bodies. Abraham was 99 years old, and Sarah's womb was pretty much dead. These were 2 dead pieces of wood. And suddenly, 3 people come to their house, and they say this, Sarah, this time next year, you will be having a kid. They said, and she actually laughed, and she said, I'm as dead as a wood, and Abraham is so old. Can anything come out of this dead pieces of wood? But they said, is anything too difficult for the Lord? Is anything too difficult for a carpenter? Even if he gets a dead wood, he can create things out of it. And exactly 1 year later, they had a child. And this is how he creates new things. At this beginning part of the year, I want to ask you, what part of you have you considered dead? And the Lord wants to say, this year, this time next year, you will have that accomplished. Bring your dead things to the carpenter. He would make beautiful things just because of his skill and because of his workmanship. Put a trust on him. Bring your dead pieces and see what happens in a year. Bring them to the carpenter. And in Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 7, Isaiah says, I have come here to proclaim the year of...
Bring it closer. We'll ask them to reduce that. Bring the mic closer. Yeah, go ahead.
Isaiah chapter 61, in 1 it says, I have come to proclaim the year of Lord's favor. Let this be the year of Lord's favor for all of us. And he says in verse 7, when you bring your dead pieces to God, he says, instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion. And instead of your disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. You will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. Bring your dead pieces and experience this everlasting joy of yours. Now, this didn't end there. This story of Abraham and Sarah, it didn't end with it. He says in Isaiah it was everlasting joy. Yes, the carpenter not only created Isaac, but a whole generation through them. And he created this generation for himself, and they are called the Hebrews or the Israelites. And as in Romans, it says, all that Abraham did was in Romans, this story of Sarah and Abraham has been repeated many times. In Romans 4:18 to 19 is one place where it says, against all hope, Abraham in hope believed and so became the father of many nations without weakening in his faith. He faced the fact that his body was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also dead, and through these dead pieces, God created a generation for himself. Yes, he creates. What is the next thing that he does? Down the generation of these Israelites, about the 7th generation, there was a young prince who was growing up in the palace of Pharaoh. His name was Moses. He had a deep passion to liberate his people. He had all the power and authority. He had the skills. He had everything that he had to liberate the people, his own generation of that came from Abraham and Sarah. But one day, when he was going about his chores, he saw one of his tribe person being mistreated by an Egyptian, and that moment he lost control of himself. He fell upon the Egyptian and killed him. He was trying to liberate it that way. He was trying to fulfill God's purposes by human means. But that is not how God operates. God respects your purposes. You can do God's purposes, but not through your own wisdom, not through your own power or authority, just as this young prince tried to do. You can't do God's purposes through human means. So what did the carpenter do? He took him away. For 40 years he was trained in the palace. And for the next 40 years, this carpenter started working on him, day by day. Probably I think he would have sanded him. Day by day, this young prince was worked upon by the carpenter. In the deserts, in the sands of the Median deserts, he was sand, day in and day out for another 40 years. The carpenter didn't give up on him. He was such intolerant. He couldn't tolerate a single instance of his tribe person being ill-treated. And God sanded him so much, he transformed him to be a person who was supposed to be known as the meekest of all men. The Bible in Numbers 12, 1 to 3, it says how much he has transformed. From being this intolerant person, full of rage, full of anger, who couldn't stand one moment of ill treatment, now, when even his own sister Miriam spoke against him, saying that, has only God spoken to you? Has he not spoken to us? He was so tolerant, and it is described in the Bible in verses Numbers 12, 1 to 3, he says, now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. From this arrogant young prince, full of rage, this is what God can transform. God transformed him into the most meek of all men there. And this is how God transforms you. He respects your passion, but you can't achieve God's purposes through human beings. Just surrender yourself to him, and the carpenter will work on you. Now, the person who couldn't stand one moment of mistreatment, for the next 40 years, every day, he led 2.4 million people who were constantly complaining, who were constantly grumbling. I don't like the food here. Did we not have cucumbers in Egypt? They were complaining about food. They were complaining about water that was bitter. They were complaining about each and everything, not once, for 40 years. And he was able to put up with that. He became so tolerant and meek. That is the transformation which this carpenter can bring about. What is your problem? Moses' problem or his undoing was his anger. What is your undoing? Is something preventing you from accomplishing God's purposes? Bring it to him. In Galatians, he lists out all the problems that we have to be liberated from. Anger, malice. If you can get that slide up. we have about 15 or 16 problems that probably would prevent us from fulfilling God's purposes. Surrender it to them. God will transform it into all the fruit of the spirits. Yes, he creates and he transforms. The next thing that he always does is he strengthens. When you become weak, then the go-to place is to the carpenter. He strengthens you. Now, along this generation, we'll see three instances where the people were weak. When they were about to enter into the land of Canaan, they were really weak. They saw the giants there in the places, and they were really thought, oh, we are so weak. They are so strong. Could we do this? And this is where God tells Joshua. In Joshua 1, 8 and 9, he says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord God will be with you wherever you go. Are you weak? Are you thinking that you'll lose, you'll fail? Be strong and courageous. And down the line to the psalmist claims, who was a king, yet he was weak. He says in 73:22, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. We as human beings, we become weak due to so many things. And it is God who strengthens us. This carpenter, go to him and he will provide you with the strength. And to the prophets, they were always standing up against powerful forces like the kings. And to them, they were always weak. They were ordinary people. In Isaiah, he says to Isaiah 33, in 33:2, Isaiah calls upon the Lord. He says, Lord, be gracious to us. We long for you. Be our strength every morning, our salvation in times of distress. Go to the Lord every morning and ask him to be your strength. He is more than willing to be your strength in your weakness. And even Paul, the great apostle who wrote so many books of the Bibles, he was weak. We consider him to be so strong, but he himself was weak. And he says in 2 Corinthians 12, 9 to 10, which was our New Testament reading, that he had a weakness. We do not know what that weakness is. Probably that represents the weakness that you consider prime in your life. Each one of us, if we have a weakness, I think Paul talks about that weakness. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said it was not taken away. Instead, the Lord said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This is what God does. He doesn't take away your weakness, but he strengthens you through his grace, this miraculous instrument called grace. So he boasts about his weakness so that Christ's power may rest on me. For he says, when I am weak, that is when I am strong. Because I'm not doing it by human means, now I'm doing it by God's means. Though it could be God's purposes, when you are weak, then God comes in and acts as a substitute for you. That is when you are really strong. And coming to the last point, he creates. The first one, he creates, he transforms, he strengthens, and more often, he fixes broken things. Whenever something is broken, we always take it to the carpenter to fix it. And we have here in our gospel reading, the people said they were amazed and said, isn't this the carpenter's son? So all the people who were broken, they took their brokenness to this carpenter's son. There were lepers who came and got healed. There were people who brought their dead people and dead child, and he revived them to life. There was this centurion who had a servant healed. All the broken people, if you are sick, he opened the eyes of the blind. He drove out demons from people. And that is what we call it as fixing. But wait, are we talking about the carpenter or the carpenter's son? The title of this sermon is called The Carpenter's Son. So we understood that this is what the carpenters do, creating, transforming, strengthening, and fixing things. In those days, there was not much to take between a carpenter and his son. They didn't have you can't choose your career. You just follow the career of your father. If your father is a farmer, you become a farmer. If your father is a rabbi, then you become a rabbi. If he's a shepherd, you grow up as a shepherd and become a shepherd. And therefore, there is not much between the Father and the Son. In Colossians 1:16, it says, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him." The carpenter and the Son. The carpenter creates all things through him and for him, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Imagine a situation like this. The father says, "Son, can you make something beautiful out of these two pieces of wood?" "Yes, Dad, I'll do it." Here comes Isaac. "Son, can you sand this piece of wood? I like this wood. I like this quality. It is very good. But then you have to work on it so that we can make something useful." "Yes, Dad, sure." And he started to work on it. "Son, could you strengthen all these pieces of wood? It has to be seasoned. Only then it can be fit for work. They are very weak." "Yes, Dad, let me go and strengthen it." "Son, can you fix these broken things? You know there is a devil. He comes and breaks us all. He breaks relationships. He breaks so many things." And the carpenter says, "Son, can you fix all of them?" "Yes," he said, "I can do it, Dad, except for one thing." All through the generation, there was one thing which was not fixed. How do you fix things? The carpenter and the Son knows how to fix things. When two pieces are broken, they put in a support to fix those two things. What happens when you break a bone? What do? They put in a plate, they put in a rod, and then they screw it, and then it's fixed. What happens when your teeth gets misaligned? You put a brace, you screw it, and that is how you put and fix those broken things. You always need this extra brace in order to fix the broken things. Now, all along, this father was telling the son, "Can you fix this broken thing?" But the son was not able to find that appropriate brace which would enable him to fix this broken thing. It was down the generations, right from the Garden of Eden, there was a broken relationship which the son was trying to get an appropriate brace. All through the generations, he was trying and searching for this brace, but he couldn't find that brace. Eventually, when he was on this earth, he found the brace. And the brace was himself. As soon as he found the brace, he set out to work on fixing those broken relationships. What did he do? He went and then laid on the two pieces of wood and had himself nailed. And that is how he fixed this broken relationship between his father, the carpenter, and the pinnacle of his creations, the mankind. This broken relationship, this carpenter's son went and nailed himself, two hands on one wood, two legs on another wood, and that is how he fixed this broken relationship forever. Isn't this the carpenter's son? And for this, the people in the gospel reading we read say, where did he get this wisdom? Is this not the carpenter's son? Yes, for this he is called the carpenter's son. The story doesn't end there. This carpenter's son now has an unfinished family trade. This was his family trade: creating, transforming, strengthening, fixing. Now he has some unfinished business. He wants to expand this family trade to reach many, many peoples throughout the world. And for this, he needs some tools. He needs a number of tools. Down the ages, he has been always getting this full supply of tools. Prominent among those tools, if you want to know what those tools were, you can go to Hebrews chapter 11 and see a small list, but prominent tools in his toolkit. You can find the tools by name: Abel, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, even a prostitute Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and some kings, David and Solomon, and a number of prophets. These were the tools he was using in each of these generations in order to fulfill. As you know, a carpenter has many tools and he needs more tools, especially now because he wants to expand his family trade to encompass the whole world. He's looking for new tools. Will you be a tool in the carpenter's son's hands? He is inviting you to become a tool, to accomplish greater things for him in order to expand his family trade and the trade of all the four things that we saw. What will I get if I become his tool, if I leave everything and go, if I follow this carpenter's son, what will I get? Let's see what these tools in the generations got. These tools conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. They shut down the mouths of lions. They quenched the fury of flames, escaped the edge of the sword, and they did so many powerful things. Are you not excited to do those powerful things that those tools accomplished in that generation? He is inviting you. He is inviting you to come and be part of his toolkit. Do you want to be held by the carpenter's son as a tool? And do you want to accomplish many things? Are you still not convinced? Is there any other better thing that we could in our generation? And is there anything else or more that we could accomplish? If you are not convinced, I think we are making a mistake. We should be convinced because the one who is calling, is he not the carpenter's son? Amen.